Ethan Parker had always believed that the foundation of his life was unshakable, built on the steady love and unwavering support of his mother, Margaret. From the moment he opened his eyes to the world, Margaret had been there, guiding him through scraped knees, late-night fears, and the small triumphs of childhood. Their home in suburban Pennsylvania was modest but warm, a symbol of Margaret's sacrifices and quiet resilience. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and the faint aroma of baked bread often lingered in the air, a comforting reminder that even when life seemed unpredictable, some things remained constant. It was in this environment of love and stability that Ethan grew, learning the values of kindness, hard work, and family loyalty. Yet beneath this idyllic surface, Ethan carried an impatience, a yearning for excitement and success that often led him down impulsive paths. Margaret had always seen the potential in her son. She had worked 2 jobs when he was younger, juggling shifts at a local diner and a part-time night cleaning job at a hospital, just so Ethan could attend piano lessons and have a stable environment. Her hands were worn and calloused, but they were the hands that tucked him into bed, that wiped away tears after schoolyard fights, that whispered words of encouragement when exams seemed insurmountable. For Margaret, Ethan was more than a son, he was the embodiment of all her hopes, the reason she had endured long nights and endless sacrifice. She believed in him in ways that sometimes made Ethan feel invincible, even when he faltered. The morning started like any other, with sunlight streaming through the half-open blinds of their kitchen. Margaret moved around with practiced ease, flipping pancakes while humming a tune from her youth, a sound that had become a subtle lullaby in Ethan's life. He slouched in his chair, coffee cup in hand, staring absently out the window at the quiet street. Their small town was waking up, a neighbor's dog barked in the distance, the school bus rumbled by, and a faint hum of lawnmowers filled the air. Margaret glanced at him, a soft smile on her lips, unaware of the storm brewing beneath Ethan's calm exterior. He had taken a step that he would soon regret, a reckless gamble that threatened to fracture the bond he held most sacred. Ethan had secretly diverted funds from a savings account his mother had painstakingly built for her medical needs. The money was meant for an upcoming checkup she had postponed repeatedly, insisting that Ethan's ambitions were more important. But driven by a combination of pride, desperation, and the allure of a risky business opportunity, Ethan convinced himself that he would return the money before she noticed. At first, it seemed like a harmless shortcut, a temporary setback that would soon be rectified. Yet, as days turned into weeks, the weight of his betrayal began to press down on him like an invisible chain. Each time he looked at Margaret's trusting smile, guilt gnawed at his conscience. The first crack in their relationship appeared on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Margaret had stopped by the bank to deposit some personal savings, a ritual she performed every other week. That day, she discovered the missing funds. The shock was palpable, and for a moment, the bustling bank around her seemed to fade into silence. Her hands trembled as she clutched the bank statement, eyes scanning the numbers that no longer aligned with her expectations. It wasn't the amount, it was the violation of trust that cut deeper than any financial loss. When she returned home, her usually bright eyes were shadowed with disappointment and hurt, emotions she tried to mask but could not hide entirely. Ethan sensed the change immediately. The atmosphere in their home, once filled with warmth and easy conversation, felt heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. He tried to engage her in casual talk, joked about small things, but Margaret's responses were measured, guarded. Her love was still there, unbroken, but it had been tempered by the sting of betrayal. The subtle looks, the sighs, the moments when her gaze lingered on him with quiet sadness, all communicated the fracture that had occurred. It was a confrontation he had avoided, but he knew it was inevitable. Finally, Margaret sat him down at the kitchen table, the very table where countless family meals had been shared. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft patter of rain against the windows. She spoke calmly, her voice steady but carrying a weight that made Ethan's stomach knot. She asked him to explain, to tell her why he had done what he did, and in that moment, Ethan felt the full gravity of his actions. Words stumbled from his lips, a mixture of excuses and confessions, each one reflecting his internal battle between pride and guilt. The camera of the audience's imagination would linger on their faces. Margaret's quiet hurt contrasted against Ethan's guilt-ridden expressions, a tableau of a relationship teetering on the edge. The fallout extended beyond words. Margaret withdrew slightly, a protective shield around her heart, while Ethan's usual confidence faltered under the weight of remorse. In a town where neighbors knew each other's business, whispers began to circulate, friends who noticed Ethan's distracted demeanor, co-workers who sensed tension, and even casual acquaintances who remarked on the change in his aura. The betrayal was no longer confined to their home, it rippled outward, affecting how Ethan was perceived by the wider community. Yet, despite the darkness, the story hinted at the potential for redemption. Even in the quiet despair of that first day after the betrayal was revealed, there was a lingering thread of hope. Margaret's love, though wounded, remained steadfast. Ethan's conscience, though burdened, had not been broken. And in the heart of a small American town, where relationships were intertwined and second chances were valued, the stage was set for a journey that would test the limits of trust, love, and forgiveness. This opening section establishes the core emotional stakes of the story: a mother's unwavering love, a son's betrayal, and the fragile nature of trust. The cinematic potential lies in the intimate domestic scenes, the visual contrasts between warmth and tension, and the palpable internal struggles of both characters. The audience is drawn in, empathizing with both the hurt of Margaret and the guilt of Ethan, setting the stage for the redemptive journey that follows. The tension in the Parker household grew like a storm slowly gathering strength on the horizon. After Margaret discovered the missing money, every interaction between mother and son became a careful negotiation of words, a fragile dance around the raw wound that had been exposed. Ethan tried to return to normal routines, offering polite smiles and casual comments, but the atmosphere was thick with unspoken disappointment. Even the familiar clink of dishes in the kitchen or the scent of brewing coffee felt heavy, almost accusatory. In a small town like theirs, where everyone knew each other's business and reputations carried weight, the betrayal had far-reaching implications beyond their immediate relationship. Margaret, for her part, had retreated into a quiet vigilance. She went about her daily tasks with her usual efficiency, preparing meals, cleaning, running errands, but there was a subtle edge to her movements, a carefulness in her gestures that betrayed her inner turmoil. Her eyes, once warm and inviting, now carried a shadow of hurt and distrust. Each glance at Ethan was a mix of maternal concern and guarded caution, a silent reminder that while love remained, it was no longer unconditional in the same way. The community's gaze, whether real or imagined, weighed heavily on her. She worried not only about her son's choices but also about how others perceived her parenting, adding another layer of pressure to an already fraught situation. Ethan felt the full weight of the consequences for the first time that evening. As he returned home from work, he found Margaret sitting at the kitchen table, a single lamp casting a pool of warm light over her worried face. The conversation began quietly, with her asking about his day, her voice calm but measured. But when Ethan attempted to explain or excuse his actions, the cracks in his words were apparent. Margaret's silence was sharp, speaking volumes without uttering a single accusatory sentence. It was a silence that demanded introspection, forcing Ethan to confront the depth of his betrayal and the reality of his mistakes. As the days passed, the emotional strain seeped into every corner of Ethan's life. At work, his colleagues noticed the change. Once confident and charismatic, he now seemed distracted, withdrawn, and anxious. Minor mistakes, previously overlooked, began to draw attention, and whispers followed him through office corridors. Ethan's professional reputation, carefully built over years of dedication, started to erode, mirroring the crumbling trust at home. The contrast between the confident man he had once been and the fragile, guilt-ridden figure he had become was stark. Cinematic close-ups would capture the subtle tremors in his hands, the anxious fidgeting, and the haunted look in his eyes as he tried to navigate a world that suddenly seemed less forgiving. Socially, Ethan felt increasingly isolated. Friends who had once been supportive grew distant, unsure how to engage with someone who had violated the trust of someone as beloved and respected as Margaret. Invitations to gatherings dwindled, casual conversations became strained, and the once vibrant connections of his youth felt tenuous at best. Even the small-town community that had nurtured him now viewed him through a lens of caution. The audience senses not only the personal fallout but also the societal one, how a single act of betrayal can ripple outward, affecting relationships, reputation, and self-perception. Margaret's struggle was equally palpable. She experienced conflicting emotions, disappointment, anger, and an enduring love that refused to be extinguished. Nights were the hardest, when the house was quiet and her mind replayed every memory of Ethan as a child, every sacrifice she had made, every trust she had extended. She questioned her own judgment, wondering whether she had been too lenient, too trusting, or too blind to the impulsive tendencies she had always known existed in her son. Yet, despite the pain, she refrained from punishing him in ways that would break him completely. Her approach was one of quiet correction, a careful balance between letting him experience the consequences of his actions and maintaining the foundation of love on which their bond was built. One afternoon, Ethan attempted to apologize, seeking some form of reconciliation. They met in the small living room, the same space where he had grown up surrounded by family photos and mementos of childhood milestones. His voice was tentative, laced with regret and self-reproach. He spoke of intentions, of mistakes, and of a desire to make amends. Margaret listened, her posture straight, her expression measured. She did not respond immediately, allowing the weight of his words to settle, reflecting a deep understanding that healing would not come from quick forgiveness but from time and visible change. The room, bathed in soft, natural light, felt both intimate and tense, a cinematic space that captured the gravity of their fractured relationship. Meanwhile, Ethan's own inner dialogue became a constant companion. Every decision, every movement, was weighed against the knowledge of what he had done. Sleep was restless, punctuated by dreams of disappointment and visions of Margaret's hurt expression. He wandered through familiar streets of the small town, seeing reminders of happier times, childhood haunts, the park where he learned to ride a bike, the diner where Margaret had celebrated small victories in his life, all tinged now with a sense of loss. These moments emphasized the contrast between past innocence and present consequence, highlighting the depth of the emotional stakes. In the broader American cultural context, this story reflects values that resonate deeply with audiences: the importance of trust within family, the weight of personal responsibility, and the social consequences of one's actions. Small-town dynamics, where personal and professional lives intertwine and reputations are closely observed, amplify the emotional impact. The Parker household becomes a microcosm of broader societal expectations, showing that betrayal is not only a personal matter but one that reverberates through the fabric of community life. By the end of this section, the audience feels the full gravity of Ethan's choices, the strain on his relationship with his mother, the social isolation he experiences, and the internal battle that consumes him. Cinematically, the visual storytelling, dimly lit rooms, quiet streets, lingering shots of hesitant glances and heavy silences, reinforces the emotional weight. This stage of the narrative sets the foundation for transformation, leaving viewers both distressed and eager to see whether Ethan can find a path to redemption, and whether Margaret's love will ultimately endure the storm of betrayal. The Ethan Parker's world seemed to collapse in slow motion, each day compounding the weight of his mistakes. The reckless decision to misappropriate his mother's savings had triggered a cascade of consequences he had never anticipated. His business venture, once full of promise and ambition, unraveled like a fraying rope. Investors pulled back, deadlines were missed, and partners questioned his judgment. The office that had once been a place of energy and potential now felt suffocating, the walls closing in with every glance at spreadsheets that refused to balance. Ethan's confidence, which had been a defining part of his personality, was replaced by anxiety, self-doubt, and a gnawing sense of failure that seemed impossible to shake. Returning home offered no respite. The Parker household, once warm and comforting, felt smaller, almost suffocating. Every corner reminded him of the trust he had shattered. Margaret's measured distance was a constant reminder of the breach he had caused. Her subtle sighs, the careful avoidance of his gaze, and the quiet pauses in her speech were sharper than any words could have been. Ethan had crossed a line, and he felt it in every heartbeat, in every hesitation when speaking, in every glance around the house. The home, which had symbolized safety and love, now mirrored his inner turmoil. Nights were the hardest. Ethan would lie awake, staring at the ceiling as the darkness pressed in, questioning every decision that had led him here. Dreams of disappointment haunted him, visions of Margaret's tearful face, moments of confrontation replaying endlessly, and the judgmental whispers of the small-town community echoing in his mind. Sleep offered no relief, only a restless rehearsal of mistakes. He wandered his apartment in the dead of night, the hum of the refrigerator and the faint glow of streetlights casting shadows that seemed to mirror the isolation he felt. In these moments, the audience sees not just a man punished by circumstances but a soul grappling with the enormity of his moral failings. The streets of downtown Philadelphia, which he occasionally traversed for work or errands, now became a stage for reflection and despair. Passing office buildings and upscale restaurants, he felt the stark contrast between his failures and the successes of those around him. Friends and colleagues who once smiled and exchanged casual greetings now gave him distant nods or avoided interaction entirely. The vibrant energy of the city, full of opportunity and promise, seemed to mock him, emphasizing the gulf between the man he once imagined himself to be and the one he had become. Cinematic shots would linger on Ethan walking alone in rain-slicked streets, reflections shimmering on wet pavement, a visual metaphor for his fractured state of mind. Financial stress compounded the emotional toll. Bills piled up, overdue notices arrived, and the looming threat of eviction began to cast a shadow over his daily life. The lavish dreams that had motivated his risky venture crumbled into stark reality. Every failed attempt to recover losses reminded him of the irresponsibility that had initiated the downward spiral. Ethan's pride, once a driving force, became an obstacle, leaving him oscillating between stubborn denial and crushing regret. The audience witnesses a man at the intersection of ambition and consequence, learning in the harshest ways how actions have tangible results. Socially, the fallout was equally profound. Friends he had taken for granted now questioned his character, their once warm greetings replaced by cautious, measured tones. Invitations dwindled, leaving him isolated in a world where he had previously felt confident and connected. Even casual interactions at the local grocery store or coffee shop carried an unspoken tension, the subtle judgment of neighbors and acquaintances reflecting the erosion of trust that extended beyond his family. In a culture where reputation in small communities is deeply significant, this isolation magnified the emotional stakes, making Ethan's journey more relatable to audiences who understand the importance of social bonds. Margaret's continued distance added another layer of pain. She did not need to speak to convey her disappointment, her posture, her quiet demeanor, and her reluctant smiles were enough. Ethan observed these signals daily, each one driving home the realization that repairing their bond would not be simple. The depth of his mother's disappointment acted as both a mirror and a motivator, showing him the person he had become while igniting a desire to change before it was too late. Cinematic close-ups of her hands folded tightly on the table, her eyes glistening as she looked away, and the slight tension in her jaw conveyed the silent agony of a mother whose trust had been broken. In this period of despair, Ethan began to reflect on his past. He remembered childhood moments of laughter and innocence, the support of his mother through school projects, late-night conversations, and small victories he had taken for granted. Flashbacks to family vacations, birthdays, and quiet evenings together contrasted sharply with the present, highlighting the emotional cost of his choices. The audience experiences the juxtaposition of past warmth against present desolation, evoking empathy for both mother and son. Despite the darkness, subtle sparks of self-awareness began to emerge. Ethan's guilt became a catalyst for reflection. He started keeping a journal, writing late into the night about the events that had led him here, his motivations, and his failures. This process, though painful, provided a glimmer of clarity. For the first time, he began to recognize the depth of responsibility inherent in trust, the moral weight of honesty, and the consequences of betrayal. The audience is invited to journey with him through this painful self-examination, feeling the tension between despair and the potential for growth. The emotional climax of this section comes during a solitary walk through his neighborhood, past familiar landmarks that now seem distant and unreachable. Children play in the yards, neighbors chat on porches, and life continues around him, indifferent to his personal failures. Ethan's isolation is palpable, yet within it lies the seed of transformation. He realizes that hitting rock bottom is not just an endpoint but a turning point, a space where introspection can lead to change if he is willing to confront his flaws and accept responsibility. Cinematic framing emphasizes his small, solitary figure against the expanse of the town, symbolizing both vulnerability and the potential for renewal. By the end of this section, Ethan is fully aware of the magnitude of his mistakes, financial ruin, social isolation, and fractured family bonds. He has experienced the lowest point of his personal and moral journey, a raw and unfiltered confrontation with failure. The audience feels the emotional weight acutely, empathizing with his struggle while sensing that the path to redemption, though daunting, is possible. This section lays the foundation for the transformative arc that will follow, setting the stage for hope, reflection, and eventual moral growth. Ethan Parker's life had descended into a haze of regret, sleepless nights, and restless wandering. Each morning felt heavier than the last, and even the smallest tasks seemed like monumental challenges. It was during one of these bleak afternoons, as he trudged up the steps to his modest apartment, that the unexpected letter arrived. The envelope was unassuming, plain white, slightly worn at the edges, with no return address, only his name carefully handwritten in neat script. He hesitated for a moment, turning it over in his hands, unsure whether opening it would offer relief or deepen his despair. The subtle weight of curiosity pulled him in, and finally, with a mixture of apprehension and hope, he slit the envelope open. The letter inside was simple, yet it carried an undeniable gravity. Each sentence was written with care, offering insight without judgment, guidance without condescension. The words seemed to reach directly into Ethan's consciousness, bypassing his defenses and speaking to the guilt and longing that had been gnawing at him for weeks. The author of the letter acknowledged the pain of mistakes, yet emphasized the possibility of redemption through small, deliberate actions. Ethan felt a jolt of disbelief. How could a stranger understand the intricate web of his failures, the depth of the disappointment he had caused his mother, or the fear that he had permanently fractured the bond that had defined his life? He reread the letter, and with each pass, certain phrases struck him with increasing intensity. "It is never too late to make things right," one line said, and another reminded him that, trust, once broken, can be rebuilt with honesty, humility, and consistent action. The words felt like a lifeline, something tangible amidst the emotional fog that had enveloped him. The handwriting, slightly uneven yet deliberate, suggested a person who had lived, erred, and learned from experience. Ethan felt a mixture of emotions, a flicker of hope, a pang of shame, and a growing curiosity about the identity of this mysterious messenger. The timing of the letter was uncanny. Only the day before, he had walked the streets of his neighborhood, seeing reminders of what he had lost, the vibrant laughter of children playing in yards, neighbors sharing casual greetings, and the simple rituals of life continuing around him, indifferent to his suffering. The contrast had been stark, intensifying his feelings of isolation and inadequacy. Now, holding this letter, he felt as though the universe had offered him a subtle push, a signal that even in the depths of despair, an opportunity for guidance and change could emerge unexpectedly. Cinematic tension fills this moment. The apartment is dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls as the late afternoon sun filters through blinds. The camera lingers on Ethan's face, capturing every flicker of emotion, the hesitation, the disbelief, the spark of hope igniting behind his eyes. Close-ups of his hands clutching the letter, fingers trembling slightly, convey the weight of the moment. In the silence of the room, the letter's words echo, amplifying the emotional resonance and inviting the audience to feel the potential shift in his journey. As he read further, the letter encouraged introspection and accountability. The writer suggested that Ethan take tangible steps to reconcile with his mother, emphasizing that trust could not be restored by words alone. They spoke of the importance of small gestures, consistent actions that demonstrated sincerity, care, and respect. The letter highlighted a critical moral principle: redemption is earned, not granted. For Ethan, who had been mired in guilt and passivity, this was a revelation. The path forward, though challenging, was suddenly illuminated with purpose. Ethan spent hours poring over the letter, letting the words sink in. The phrases lingered, repeating in his mind, "Actions speak louder than apologies. Your past does not define your capacity to change. Even the smallest step toward honesty carries immense weight." Each statement resonated deeply, creating a quiet urgency in his heart. He felt the first real stirrings of resolve, a fragile but tangible determination to act, to begin the painstaking process of repairing the bond he had broken. Despite the clarity the letter provided, questions lingered. Who had written it? Why him? How could someone who didn't know the intimate details of his life offer guidance so profoundly aligned with his struggles? Ethan's curiosity was piqued, but it did not overshadow the central message: he had a responsibility to act. The mystery of the sender added a cinematic layer of intrigue, a subtle tension that promised further revelation if he pursued it. The audience, meanwhile, is drawn into this narrative puzzle, feeling the suspense and emotional pull alongside Ethan. The letter also prompted Ethan to reflect on his relationship with Margaret in a new light. He remembered her sacrifices, long hours spent working multiple jobs, the nights she stayed awake worrying about him, the unwavering support she had offered even when he was reckless or ungrateful. He realized how fragile trust was, how easily it could be damaged, and how much courage it would take to rebuild it. The letter's words acted as both a mirror and a catalyst, forcing Ethan to confront his shortcomings without self-pity, and to consider concrete steps toward reconciliation. Over the next few days, the letter's influence became increasingly apparent. Ethan began to see his environment differently, noticing opportunities to act with integrity and kindness. He observed his neighbors, his co-workers, and even strangers with a heightened awareness of the consequences of choices and the impact of actions on others. Simple gestures, returning a lost item, offering a hand to someone struggling, acknowledging mistakes openly, became small but significant ways for him to test his commitment to change. The narrative emphasizes that transformation begins in the mundane, in everyday moments that collectively redefine character. The arrival of this anonymous letter marked a pivotal turning point. Ethan's despair, once consuming, began to coexist with hope. He recognized that his journey toward redemption would not be immediate or easy, but the letter provided a roadmap, a moral compass guiding him through uncertainty. Cinematically, the moment is rich with visual symbolism: the envelope as a vessel of hope, sunlight beginning to filter into the dim apartment, and Ethan's face shifting from despondence to quiet determination. The audience experiences a mixture of suspense, relief, and anticipation, invested in seeing whether he will seize this opportunity for transformation. By the end of this section, Ethan is no longer a man entirely defined by mistakes and guilt. The letter has opened a window into possibility, showing him that change is possible if he acts with sincerity and courage. The emotional stakes are heightened, as the audience now shares his hope and curiosity, eager to witness the next steps in his journey toward redemption and reconciliation with the mother whose trust he shattered. After the mysterious letter arrived, Ethan Parker felt a subtle shift within himself, a stirring of accountability that had long been dormant. For the first time in weeks, he approached the day with intentionality rather than despair. The words of the anonymous sender echoed in his mind, urging him to act rather than merely dwell on guilt. He realized that rebuilding his life, and, most importantly, the bond with his mother, would require tangible effort, consistent actions that demonstrated sincerity and moral resolve. Redemption, he understood now, was not a singular event but a process, one measured in small steps and deliberate choices. The first step came unexpectedly. Walking past the local community center, Ethan noticed a group of children struggling with after-school homework while a volunteer attempted to manage the chaos. Something stirred in him, a memory of his own mother staying up late to help him with math problems, the sacrifices she had made to nurture his potential. Without overthinking, he offered his assistance. At first, the children were hesitant, unsure of the stranger-like presence of an adult who had just joined their environment. But Ethan's patience, gentle tone, and willingness to listen won them over. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of purpose that extended beyond himself. The act was small, almost mundane, yet profoundly transformative. Ethan also sought part-time work to begin repaying the funds he had taken from his mother. He approached a local diner that he had frequented as a child, offering to help in the evenings. Flipping burgers, washing dishes, and cleaning tables, he faced physical labor that was humbling yet grounding. Each task reminded him of responsibility in its most tangible form, reinforcing the moral lesson that actions, not intentions alone, defined character. Cinematic montages could capture the rhythmic repetition of these tasks, interspersed with subtle expressions of self-reflection, showing Ethan's journey from reckless impulsivity toward disciplined accountability. The transformation extended beyond public gestures. Ethan began to reevaluate his personal habits and thought patterns. He kept a journal, recording not only his daily actions but also reflections on his motivations, successes, and missteps. He wrote candidly about the consequences of his betrayal, the depth of his mother's hurt, and the challenges inherent in regaining trust. Each entry acted as a mirror, revealing the areas of his life that required realignment. The audience sees the internal evolution as clearly as the external. This is a man beginning to confront his flaws with honesty and courage. In small-town America, the social dynamics reinforced Ethan's journey. Neighbors and community members observed his efforts with cautious curiosity. While some were skeptical, others offered quiet encouragement, creating a backdrop of realism that emphasized that redemption is rarely instantaneous or universally recognized. Scenes of neighbors nodding in passing, patrons at the diner offering polite smiles, and children greeting him warmly at the community center illustrate the slow but perceptible rebuilding of social trust. These interactions serve as emotional beats, rewarding Ethan's incremental progress while maintaining narrative tension. The moral lessons embedded in these actions were profound. Ethan realized that rebuilding trust with his mother would require more than financial restitution. It demanded patience, humility, and consistent demonstration of reliability. He began calling Margaret each morning, not with excuses, but with simple updates, expressions of care, or offers to help with errands. At first, she responded minimally, her voice cautious and measured. Yet over time, even small changes in her tone reflected subtle acknowledgement of his sincerity. Cinematic framing captures these intimate exchanges, the faint tremor in Margaret's voice, the tentative smile she allows herself, and Ethan's hopeful yet restrained anticipation. Ethan also confronted the emotional barriers that had led him astray. He reflected on his previous reliance on shortcuts, impulsive decisions, and prideful assumptions that he could manipulate outcomes without consequence. Through quiet moments alone, walking through parks, sitting in cafes, or staring out his apartment window at the small town's familiar streets, he processed the depth of his failings. These scenes highlight the intersection of internal reflection and external action, reinforcing the narrative that redemption is both an emotional and practical journey. The letter continued to guide him, serving as a touchstone for decisions and behavior. Phrases like, "small acts carry immense weight," and "consistency reveals character," became mantras, repeated silently during moments of doubt. He began to see that his actions were not solely about repairing his relationship with his mother but about rebuilding a personal sense of integrity. Cinematic techniques could illustrate this progression through sequences showing Ethan pausing to assist strangers, choosing honesty in small business dealings, and navigating daily life with newfound attentiveness to ethics and empathy. Ethan's efforts did not go unnoticed by Margaret. She observed him quietly, noticing the subtle shift in demeanor, the deliberate nature of his actions, and the absence of excuses that had previously defined his responses. She saw him approaching life with humility, acknowledging mistakes openly, and demonstrating patience when faced with challenges. While she did not offer immediate forgiveness, the cracks in her emotional armor began to soften. Their relationship, though still fragile, began to show early signs of healing. Cinematic close-ups of Margaret watching Ethan from a distance, her expressions a mix of skepticism, hope, and cautious pride, reinforced the emotional resonance of these developments. The audience witnesses Ethan's evolving relationship with the community as well. By volunteering, working diligently, and engaging with others in a spirit of genuine care, he begins to restore trust in a broader sense. The contrast between his past recklessness and present commitment becomes increasingly apparent, reinforcing the themes of personal growth, accountability, and moral awakening. This layered approach to redemption ensures that the narrative resonates emotionally, providing multiple avenues for audience engagement. By the end of this section, Ethan Parker has taken the first meaningful steps toward reclaiming his integrity. He has embraced humility, responsibility, and the importance of consistent moral action. The seeds of redemption have been sown, setting the stage for deeper reconciliation with his mother and a transformative journey that extends beyond personal restoration to the enrichment of the community around him. Cinematic visuals of his small victories, smiles from children, nods from neighbors, quiet acknowledgement from Margaret, underscore the emotional payoff of sustained effort and the beginning of a story of hope and renewal. Ethan Parker had begun the slow process of change, yet the most difficult challenge remained, facing the one person whose trust he had shattered most profoundly, his mother, Margaret. Reconnecting with her was not as simple as offering apologies or performing acts of kindness. He knew that words alone could never repair the fissures in their relationship. Trust, once broken, demanded time, consistency, and visible evidence of genuine transformation. With this in mind, he resolved to meet her in a neutral space, a setting removed from the confines of home where emotions were heavily tied to memories of past betrayal. They agreed to meet in the small-town park that had been a fixture of their lives since Ethan's childhood. The park, with its neatly kept playground, tree-lined walking paths, and familiar benches, had once been a place of laughter and carefree joy. For Ethan, the sight of the swings and open fields was both comforting and painful, a reminder of days when his mother's love felt unshakable and the world seemed simple. Now, every step toward her bench carried the weight of regret, anxiety, and the hope for a fresh start. Cinematically, this scene could be framed with soft natural lighting filtering through autumn leaves, capturing both the warmth of nostalgia and the cool tension of uncertainty. Margaret arrived first, seated on a bench, her posture straight, her hands clasped lightly in her lap. She wore a calm exterior, yet Ethan could sense the guarded wariness beneath. Her eyes, sharp and observant, followed his approach with a mixture of curiosity, concern, and subtle apprehension. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence heavy with shared history. It was the quiet tension before a storm, or perhaps the delicate calm before reconciliation. Ethan's heart raced as he found a place beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance, mindful that any misstep could reinforce her skepticism. Their conversation began cautiously. Ethan spoke first, his voice tentative but sincere. He acknowledged the betrayal, openly admitting his mistakes without making excuses. He described the guilt that had consumed him, the sleepless nights, and the profound realization of what he had jeopardized. Margaret listened quietly, her gaze fixed on a point just beyond him, her expression subtle but telling, a tightness in her jaw, a faint furrow in her brow, and occasional glances that softened at moments of genuine contrition. The audience feels the weight of this dialogue, sensing the intricate dance of honesty and emotional vulnerability between mother and son. As the conversation unfolded, Ethan found himself recalling specific memories from their shared past. He spoke of birthday celebrations, family traditions, and quiet evenings where Margaret had supported his dreams despite personal sacrifices. These recollections were not mere nostalgic flourishes, they were deliberate attempts to remind both himself and Margaret of the foundation of love that had always existed between them. Cinematic flashbacks could enhance this narrative, intercutting present tension with warm, golden-toned memories of a mother and son laughing together, building trust brick by brick over years of shared experience. Margaret responded, cautiously at first, sharing her own reflections. She spoke of the fear she had felt upon discovering the missing funds, the quiet nights worrying about Ethan's future, and the heartbreak of seeing her son make choices that compromised both his integrity and their bond. Her words were measured, balancing honesty with restraint, conveying both disappointment and an enduring love that refused to vanish. This emotional complexity added depth to her character, illustrating the multidimensional nature of parental love in American family culture, a blend of care, expectation, and moral guidance. Throughout the conversation, there were moments of silence, stretches where neither spoke, but both felt the weight of unspoken emotions. Cinematically, these pauses are powerful, allowing the audience to inhabit the characters' internal worlds, the shame, hope, fear, and tentative optimism coexisting in delicate tension. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he gestured, trying to convey remorse without seeming performative. Margaret's eyes, moist but restrained, reflected the difficulty of balancing protection with openness. These intimate details created an emotionally resonant scene, emphasizing the stakes of reconciliation. Ethan also acknowledged his understanding of the broader lessons beyond their personal relationship. He recognized that his impulsive decisions had not only hurt his mother but had repercussions extending into the community, his friendships, and his own sense of self. This acknowledgement demonstrated his growing maturity and moral development, signaling to the audience that redemption required comprehensive self-awareness, not just isolated acts of penance. He began to articulate a vision for moving forward, restoring trust gradually, demonstrating reliability, and rebuilding their relationship on the foundation of honesty and accountability. Margaret's responses were cautious but gradually softened. She allowed herself small signs of warmth, a faint smile, a gentle nod, a softened tone in her speech, each one a cinematic cue signaling incremental progress. She reminded Ethan that forgiveness was not immediate and that rebuilding trust would take time, but she also subtly encouraged him to continue on the path he had begun. The exchange emphasized the duality of emotional repair. It is both an act of the one seeking redemption and a willingness to accept vulnerability from the one who was hurt. By the end of their meeting, both mother and son had taken critical steps. Ethan had expressed genuine remorse, acknowledged his past failings, and articulated a plan for action. Margaret had offered tentative openness, signaling that she was prepared to allow the possibility of rebuilding their bond. Cinematically, this could be represented through visual motifs. Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly, the autumn sunlight warming their faces, and a gentle breeze moving through the trees, subtle signs of new beginnings and the fragile hope of reconciliation. The narrative significance of this section lies in its emphasis on emotional labor, patience, and authentic dialogue. The act of reconnecting was not about grand gestures but about bridging gaps with honesty, empathy, and shared reflection. It highlighted universal themes that resonate with American audiences: the importance of family, the complexity of trust, and the transformative power of vulnerability. Through this meeting, Ethan and Margaret begin to rebuild the bridges to their past, acknowledging pain while opening a pathway to healing. By the conclusion of this section, the audience witnesses a pivotal turning point. The foundation for redemption has been strengthened, and the emotional stakes are clearly defined. Reconciliation is possible but must be earned through consistent actions and ongoing moral commitment. The park, with its intertwining paths and open spaces, serves as a metaphor for the journey ahead, a landscape of potential, reflection, and cautious optimism. Ethan's journey toward healing is no longer abstract, it is tangible, cinematic, and emotionally compelling, setting the stage for deeper transformation in the sections that follow. Ethan Parker had begun to rebuild his relationship with his mother, and yet he knew that personal transformation required more than small acts of reconciliation. The anonymous letter that had sparked his journey hinted at guidance beyond words. It suggested a mentor, someone who could illuminate the path from remorse to genuine redemption. Weeks passed, and just as he began to feel the weight of progress and setbacks alike, another letter arrived. This time, it included an invitation to meet, with directions to a quiet cafe tucked away in the corner of the city, away from the hustle of downtown Philadelphia. The handwriting was familiar, the same careful script that had first ignited hope in his heart. The day of the meeting, Ethan felt a blend of anxiety and anticipation. He arrived early, the crisp autumn air filling his lungs as he approached the cafe, its brick facade framed by amber-colored leaves blowing along the sidewalk. Inside, the cafe smelled of roasted coffee beans and baked pastries, the kind of comforting aroma that immediately evoked nostalgia. He scanned the small space, observing the soft Clatter of cups, the gentle hum of conversation, and the sunlight streaming through the large windows. Every detail heightened his awareness, a cinematic moment emphasizing that even ordinary settings could be charged with significance when the stakes were personal and emotional. A woman approached him shortly after he sat down. She was in her late 40s, with a calm presence that exuded quiet authority. Her eyes, sharp and perceptive, seemed to assess Ethan without judgment, yet there was an undeniable empathy that immediately put him at ease. She introduced herself simply as Clara, a retired social worker who had helped countless individuals navigate difficult life transitions. There was a sense of intentionality in her demeanor, a measured patience that signaled her role as a guide rather than a judge. From the outset, it was clear that this meeting was not about lecturing Ethan but about fostering introspection and meaningful change. The conversation began gently, with Clara asking Ethan to share his story, his ambitions, his mistakes, and the consequences that had followed. Ethan spoke with a newfound honesty, recounting the theft of his mother's savings, the sleepless nights, and the emotional isolation that had consumed him. Clara listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, her gaze encouraging yet unflinching. There was no condescension in her responses, only an unwavering presence that invited reflection. Cinematically, this exchange could be depicted with medium close-ups on their faces, capturing the subtle shifts in expression, the tremor in Ethan's voice, the attentive patience in Clara's eyes, the way silence sometimes spoke louder than words. Clara's approach was both practical and philosophical. She emphasized that redemption was not a single act but a cumulative process, built from deliberate choices, accountability, and the willingness to confront one's own flaws. She encouraged Ethan to examine not just the external consequences of his actions, but the internal patterns that had led him astray: impulsivity, pride, and avoidance of responsibility. Her guidance was structured yet flexible, offering principles rather than rigid instructions, thereby empowering Ethan to take ownership of his journey. One key lesson Clara imparted was the importance of empathy, not only toward those directly affected by one's actions but also toward oneself. She explained that guilt and self-reproach, while natural, could become paralyzing if not channeled into constructive behavior. Ethan realized that he had been trapped in cycles of shame, reliving mistakes without using the energy to create meaningful change. Clara's mentorship reframed his perspective, acknowledging mistakes, accepting responsibility, and taking consistent corrective action was not just about pleasing others, it was about becoming a person aligned with his own values. Over several meetings, Ethan and Clara worked through practical steps for reinforcing his redemption arc. She suggested ways to strengthen his relationship with Margaret, from small gestures to planned acts of service, always emphasizing that authenticity was paramount. They discussed financial accountability, community engagement, and personal habits that reinforced integrity. For example, Clara encouraged Ethan to participate in volunteer programs and mentorship initiatives in the community, offering him not only a means of restitution but also a chance to inspire others. Each recommendation was tailored to his strengths and weaknesses, ensuring that his growth would be sustainable and meaningful. Beyond guidance, Clara's mentorship offered emotional support. Ethan often arrived at their meetings burdened by guilt, self-doubt, and lingering fear that his efforts might be insufficient. Clara's calm presence provided a safe space for vulnerability, allowing him to articulate fears and anxieties he had long suppressed. This dynamic reinforced the narrative's emotional resonance: redemption is not a solitary journey. The presence of someone who believes in the potential for change can catalyze growth in ways that internal reflection alone cannot. Cinematic close-ups could capture these moments: the softening of shoulders, the tentative hope in Ethan's eyes, the quiet strength in Clara's gentle encouragement. An unexpected benefit of Clara's mentorship was the development of self-discipline and perspective. Through reflective exercises and goal-setting, Ethan began to view setbacks as learning opportunities rather than failures. He learned to pause before making impulsive decisions, to evaluate consequences, and to prioritize long-term integrity over short-term gain. This shift in mindset was both subtle and profound, illustrating to the audience that personal transformation requires attention to both actions and thought processes. The mentorship also highlighted the cultural context of accountability and moral responsibility. In American family and community-oriented culture, rebuilding trust extends beyond intimate relationships. It involves social perception, civic responsibility, and personal ethics. Clara's guidance reinforced these cultural values, emphasizing that genuine redemption resonates in both private and public spheres. Through her mentorship, Ethan began to understand that his actions had broader implications, shaping how he was perceived and how he could contribute positively to the community he had once taken for granted. By the end of this section, Ethan had established a structured path for growth. Clara's mentorship offered clarity, practical steps, and emotional support, giving him the tools to navigate the complexities of repairing his relationship with Margaret, restoring trust within the community, and rebuilding his own sense of moral integrity. Cinematically, their sessions could be framed with warm, natural light filtering through the cafe's windows, signaling both introspection and hope. The audience witnesses a turning point. Ethan is no longer drifting under the weight of regret but is guided toward purposeful action and meaningful transformation. This section emphasizes the dual importance of guidance and personal effort. The mysterious mentor becomes both a narrative device to catalyze change and a symbol of hope, the idea that external support, combined with self-reflection, can empower a person to overcome even deep moral failings. The audience is emotionally invested, rooting for Ethan's growth and eager to see how he will implement the lessons learned into both his personal life and his broader community interactions. Ethan Parker had been working quietly on rebuilding his life, guided by the mysterious mentor's wisdom and driven by his own desire to make amends. Weeks of reflection, small acts of kindness, and honest communication with his mother had begun to show subtle signs of progress, but he knew that true redemption required bolder, tangible acts, visible proof that he had changed, proof that could not be dismissed as temporary effort. The opportunity arose unexpectedly when news reached him that a local charity, which supported families struggling with sudden financial hardship, was in urgent need of volunteers to organize a fundraising event. The event's success could directly impact dozens of families, including some from his own small-town community. Ethan saw it as the perfect chance to demonstrate both his sincerity and his willingness to shoulder responsibility. He approached the organizers, offering not only his time but also his organizational skills, which he had honed through years of professional experience. The initial reaction was cautious. Volunteers were skeptical of his motives, aware of his past reputation. Ethan accepted this scrutiny without defensiveness, understanding that trust was earned through actions rather than words. The audience experiences the tension in this moment, recognizing the high stakes of his involvement. Failure could reinforce public doubt, while success could mark a pivotal step toward redemption. The preparation for the fundraiser was grueling. Ethan worked long hours coordinating logistics, contacting local businesses for donations, setting up marketing materials, and arranging schedules for other volunteers. He navigated challenges with patience, resolving conflicts among volunteers, adjusting plans when unforeseen setbacks occurred, and ensuring every detail was attended to. The physical and emotional effort required reinforced his growing sense of discipline and accountability. Cinematically, montages of Ethan moving between community centers, fielding calls on a smartphone, and manually transporting supplies emphasize both his dedication and the tangible impact of his labor. The fundraiser also became a stage for personal courage. There were moments when Ethan confronted individuals who remembered his past mistakes and openly questioned his involvement. These confrontations were uncomfortable, highlighting the lingering skepticism of the community. Yet Ethan responded with humility and grace, acknowledging his past errors without defensiveness and focusing on the present task rather than past reputation. The audience feels the emotional intensity of these interactions, sensing the vulnerability inherent in facing judgment publicly while striving to demonstrate genuine change. Throughout the process, Ethan remained mindful of the lessons imparted by Clara, his mentor. He intentionally practiced empathy, actively listening to volunteers, offering encouragement, and celebrating small successes. He recognized that leadership in this context was not about asserting authority but about fostering collaboration, trust, and shared commitment. His growth was evident not only in his actions but in his demeanor. Once impatient and self-centered, he now exuded calm determination, patience, and respect for others. Cinematic framing might show Ethan guiding a team through a tense logistical problem, his focus steady and supportive, highlighting the contrast between past impulsivity and current maturity. Margaret observed his efforts from a distance, her initial skepticism gradually giving way to cautious admiration. She saw him persevere through challenges without complaint, navigate criticism with humility, and prioritize the success of the community event over personal recognition. This subtle transformation in her perception was a critical milestone in their reconciliation. Close-ups of her expressions, softening eyes, a faint proud smile, and moments of reflection, convey her growing trust in his commitment and her recognition of his evolving character. The day of the fundraiser arrived, and Ethan's efforts culminated in a scene charged with emotional significance. Families arrived, volunteers coordinated seamlessly, and the town gathered to support the cause. Ethan moved through the crowd with quiet focus, assisting wherever needed, listening attentively, and ensuring that every aspect of the event ran smoothly. The audience feels the culmination of his weeks of preparation, witnessing the tangible manifestation of his dedication and the direct impact of his actions on the lives of others. During the event, a moment crystallized Ethan's redemption arc. A mother of 3, who had been struggling financially, approached him with tears in her eyes, thanking him for his role in organizing the fundraiser. Ethan listened, moved, and offered words of encouragement, recognizing the real-world consequences of his efforts. It was a deeply cinematic moment, the warm sunlight filtering through the park, the joyful sounds of children playing in the background, and Ethan's face reflecting a mixture of humility, pride, and emotional relief. The audience experiences the catharsis alongside him, understanding that redemption is not abstract but deeply intertwined with the welfare of others and the courage to act selflessly. By the end of the day, the fundraiser was a success. Donations exceeded expectations, the community was energized, and the families benefiting from the event received tangible support. Ethan's personal and moral growth became evident not only to himself and Margaret but to the broader town. His actions had bridged the gap between words and deeds, transforming him from a man defined by past mistakes to someone capable of meaningful contribution, accountability, and compassion. The event also served as a turning point in public perception. Where once gossip and skepticism had colored his reputation, the visible results of his commitment now generated respect, appreciation, and cautious trust. This external validation, while not the ultimate goal of his journey, reinforced the narrative theme that actions carry moral weight and that personal redemption can ripple outward to influence relationships, community, and societal perception. By the conclusion of this section, Ethan Parker had taken bold, courageous steps that demonstrated his transformation in a tangible, emotionally resonant way. Cinematically, the imagery of him overseeing the bustling, successful event, children laughing, families expressing gratitude, and Margaret watching with restrained pride encapsulates the emotional and moral significance of his actions. The audience witnesses not just a redemption narrative but a powerful story of courage, accountability, and the tangible rewards of ethical and compassionate behavior. The weeks following the fundraiser were transformative for Ethan Parker, not only in terms of public perception but in the most intimate and meaningful sphere, his relationship with his mother, Margaret. He had begun to see the slow but unmistakable signs of restoration, a subtle softening in her demeanor, a willingness to allow him back into spaces of her life that had once been closed off. Rebuilding trust was neither linear nor easy, it required patience, consistency, and constant mindfulness of the emotional stakes involved. Ethan had learned that genuine reconciliation demanded more than words or grand gestures, it was about everyday choices that reinforced accountability and care. Their interactions became more intentional. Ethan made a habit of spending quiet evenings with Margaret, helping with household chores, cooking meals, or simply sitting together in shared silence. These moments, though seemingly mundane, were powerful symbols of renewed connection. Cinematic shots could capture them preparing dinner side by side, the soft glow of the kitchen light highlighting subtle smiles, tentative laughter, and gestures of mutual recognition that spoke louder than dialogue. Each act, however small, carried moral and emotional weight, reinforcing the idea that trust is cultivated gradually through consistent, caring behavior. Ethan also took steps to acknowledge and honor Margaret's past sacrifices. He initiated conversations about her life before his mistakes, showing genuine interest in her experiences, aspirations, and struggles. This was not performative curiosity, it was an effort to understand her perspective fully, to see her not just as a parent but as a person with her own history, dignity, and resilience. Margaret, in turn, began to share stories she had rarely told, moments of hardship and triumph, her tone a mixture of pride, vulnerability, and quiet amusement. These exchanges deepened their bond, reminding both mother and son of the shared foundation of love that had never truly vanished. Ethan's personal growth also manifested in the way he approached difficult conversations. When disagreements arose, as they naturally did, they no longer escalated into recriminations or emotional distance. Instead, Ethan listened attentively, acknowledged mistakes, and sought compromise or understanding. Margaret, seeing his willingness to engage thoughtfully and humbly, began to relax her guarded posture, allowing herself to respond with greater openness and trust. Cinematic framing of these moments, lingering close-ups of facial expressions, subtle shifts in body language, and pauses that communicate reflection, emphasized the emotional nuance and gradual progress of their reconciliation. The broader community, too, witnessed Ethan's transformation. Friends, neighbors, and acquaintances who had once viewed him with skepticism now offered nods of recognition, casual greetings, or even words of encouragement. The fundraiser had established credibility, but it was Ethan's sustained, everyday acts of integrity that solidified respect. This social reinforcement mirrored the American cultural emphasis on reputation, community involvement, and consistent moral behavior. Ethan's redemption became not only a private journey but a public testament to accountability and personal growth. In the middle of this section, Ethan and Margaret shared a particularly poignant moment. They visited the local park where they had met weeks earlier, reflecting on the initial tension and the progress made since then. Margaret spoke candidly about her lingering fears, her desire to believe in his transformation, and the cautious hope she felt for their future. Ethan listened with humility, acknowledging the complexity of earning forgiveness and promising continued commitment to trust and honesty. This exchange crystallized the emotional stakes of the narrative. Reconciliation is a process of mutual vulnerability, patience, and sustained moral effort. Cinematically, wide shots of them walking along the tree-lined paths, interspersed with close-ups of their hands brushing together or subtle glances, visually underscored the rebuilding of connection and trust. Ethan also took tangible steps to demonstrate accountability beyond the mother-son relationship. He volunteered consistently, mentored young people in the community, and engaged in local initiatives that supported families in need. These acts were not for recognition but a reflection of internalized moral growth. The narrative emphasized that redemption is holistic, it encompasses personal integrity, relational repair, and societal contribution. The audience sees Ethan evolving into a multidimensional character whose actions consistently align with the values he had begun to embrace under Clara's mentorship and his own introspection. Margaret's response evolved accordingly. She began to trust him with responsibilities that had previously been withheld, gradually allowing him to contribute to family decisions, finances, and daily routines. These tangible demonstrations of trust were both symbolic and practical, signaling her recognition of his sustained commitment and her willingness to rebuild the relational foundation they had once shared. Cinematic close-ups could capture moments such as her handing him the grocery list or asking for help with a task, emphasizing the quiet but profound emotional significance of these interactions. Throughout this period, Ethan grappled with moments of self-doubt. Old patterns of guilt and anxiety occasionally resurfaced, threatening to derail his progress. Yet, he applied the lessons learned from Clara and from his experiences, pausing to reflect, reassess, and act with deliberate care. This internal tension added narrative depth, showing that redemption is never linear but requires persistence, resilience, and self-awareness. Cinematically, sequences depicting Ethan alone, walking through autumn leaves, journaling, or sitting in quiet reflection, provide insight into the emotional labor and mindfulness necessary to sustain moral growth. By the end of this section, the transformation in Ethan's relationship with Margaret was unmistakable. The cracks of distrust were gradually closing, replaced with gestures, conversations, and shared experiences that reinforced mutual respect and love. The audience witnesses not only the repair of a deeply personal bond but also the broader implications of sustained moral effort. A man who had once been defined by mistakes is now recognized for his integrity, compassion, and consistent accountability. The emotional resonance of this section lies in the nuanced portrayal of reconciliation as a journey of time, patience, and authentic engagement, rather than a single climactic event. This section sets the stage for the upcoming climactic moments, emphasizing the theme that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt through deliberate, sustained, and ethically grounded actions. Ethan's journey now carries both emotional and moral clarity, and the audience is primed to witness the final steps of transformation, public recognition, and the ultimate resolution of his story. Ethan Parker's journey of redemption had been steady, marked by small victories, public acts of service, and gradual rebuilding of his relationship with his mother. Yet he knew that true transformation would be proven not in comfort but in challenge, in moments that tested the depth of his integrity, patience, and courage. That test arrived in a way he had not anticipated. A family in his town faced a sudden crisis. Their home had suffered severe damage from a fire, leaving them displaced and in urgent need of support. The situation mirrored struggles he had once taken for granted, and he recognized immediately that his response would be a measure of how far he had truly come. Ethan approached the family without hesitation, offering assistance and mobilizing resources through the networks he had built during the fundraiser and his volunteer work. The family, wary at first, could not ignore the sincerity in his actions. He helped organize temporary housing, coordinated donations of clothing and essentials, and spent long hours providing emotional support, listening to their fears, and sharing encouragement. In every interaction, he demonstrated patience and humility, qualities that had been absent in his life before the mysterious letter and Clara's mentorship. Cinematic sequences could depict Ethan moving through the scene, organizing boxes, comforting children, guiding adults, highlighting the physical and emotional intensity of the moment. This ultimate test was not only about physical labor or logistical coordination, it was about ethical decision-making under pressure. At one point, a local businessman offered financial assistance with strings attached, public recognition, naming rights, and potential influence over how the family's story would be presented. Ethan faced a choice between personal or public gain and serving the family authentically. He chose the latter, refusing any personal benefit, insisting that the focus remain on helping the family without exploiting their vulnerability. This moment crystallized his growth, actions motivated by integrity rather than self-interest. The audience experiences a cinematic close-up of Ethan's calm but resolute expression, emphasizing the moral courage he now possesses. Ethan also faced skepticism from those who had not yet witnessed his transformation. Some neighbors questioned his motives, some volunteers doubted his reliability, and some even whispered about his past mistakes. But Ethan remained undeterred, guided by the lessons of accountability, humility, and consistency. He responded not with defensiveness but through continued action, proving over time that he had internalized the principles of trustworthiness and ethical responsibility. This narrative choice reinforces the American cultural value of personal accountability and the idea that public skepticism can be overcome through demonstrable, sustained commitment. Meanwhile, Margaret observed his work with a growing sense of pride. She saw her son not only navigating a complex and high-pressure situation but doing so with empathy, wisdom, and integrity. Her previous fears about his impulsivity and unreliability slowly dissolved as she witnessed his calm leadership and sincere concern for others. Cinematic framing of Margaret watching from a distance, her eyes moist yet proud, reinforces the emotional weight of the moment, a mother witnessing the tangible evidence of her son's transformation. The family's gratitude became an emotional anchor. One evening, after weeks of tireless effort, the mother of the family pulled Ethan aside. Her voice trembled with emotion as she expressed relief and appreciation for his unwavering support. Children who had initially clung to fear now greeted him with smiles and laughter. These moments of connection and recognition validated Ethan's moral choices, yet he remained humble, understanding that the work itself, not accolades, was the true measure of character. Cinematic close-ups of tearful eyes, small gestures of gratitude, and quiet moments of shared relief emphasized the profound emotional impact of sustained, compassionate action. This ultimate test also challenged Ethan's inner strength. The exhaustion of long hours, the weight of responsibility, and the temptation to prioritize personal gain could have undermined his commitment. Yet he drew on the lessons he had internalized from Clara and his experiences with Margaret and the community. He reminded himself that redemption was a cumulative process, dependent on consistency and authenticity, not on fleeting moments of heroism. This internal dialogue adds narrative depth, allowing the audience to witness the struggle beneath the outward display of courage and responsibility. Throughout the ordeal, Ethan remained mindful of his own growth trajectory. He reflected on how far he had come, from a man consumed by guilt and poor choices to someone capable of decisive, morally grounded action in the face of pressure. The narrative emphasizes that true transformation is both internal and external, visible in behavior, decisions, and the emotional intelligence displayed in high-stakes situations. The audience feels the tension, relief, and emotional resonance of a man finally embodying the principles he had only learned in theory weeks earlier. By the end of this challenge, Ethan had not only helped the family rebuild their lives but also cemented his personal redemption. The act demonstrated the full arc of his journey: initial mistakes, the spark of hope through the anonymous letter, guidance and mentorship, small steps of accountability, and finally, the courage to act selflessly in a high-stakes situation. Margaret's pride was evident as she approached him afterward, placing a hand on his shoulder, her smile a mixture of love, relief, and cautious optimism. Cinematic framing, warm sunlight, gentle shadows, and quiet background activity reinforces the emotional catharsis of this climactic test. This section highlights the culmination of Ethan's moral and emotional growth. The ultimate test is not a singular heroic act but a sustained display of integrity, empathy, and perseverance under pressure. It demonstrates that redemption is proven in both the quality of one's actions and the consistency with which they are carried out. The audience experiences suspense, emotional investment, and catharsis, recognizing that Ethan has not merely avoided past mistakes but has internalized principles that will guide him for a lifetime. Ethan Parker had faced trials that tested his character, confronted the consequences of his past mistakes, and demonstrated a sustained commitment to ethical action and personal growth. By now, the transformation was evident not only to himself but to those who had once doubted him. Margaret, his mother, had gradually shifted from cautious skepticism to a soft pride, observing the tangible evidence of her son's moral evolution. Their relationship, once fractured and fragile, was beginning to thrive again, rooted in honesty, consistent effort, and shared emotional understanding. The day that symbolized this full-circle moment began with an ordinary gesture. Ethan prepared breakfast for Margaret, arranging the table with thoughtful care, anticipating her preferences. These small, deliberate acts carried significant emotional weight. They reflected not only responsibility but deep empathy and attention to her well-being. Margaret, observing from the doorway, allowed herself a smile that was at once tender and reflective, a quiet acknowledgement of the transformation she had witnessed in her son over weeks of gradual, consistent change. Cinematically, the soft morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen window could illuminate both their expressions, emphasizing warmth, connection, and emotional intimacy. Their conversations had shifted from cautious exchanges to genuine dialogue. They spoke about hopes for the future, challenges in the community, and personal growth. Ethan listened attentively to Margaret's thoughts and concerns, valuing her perspective while articulating his own with honesty and humility. These conversations reflected a relationship balanced by mutual respect rather than hierarchical expectation, a hallmark of modern American family dynamics where emotional transparency and collaboration are prioritized. Margaret began to share memories of her past, laughter spilling over at stories Ethan had never heard, signaling both trust and renewed closeness. Ethan's growth extended beyond his private relationships. The community, which had once regarded him with skepticism, now offered quiet acknowledgement of his efforts. Neighbors greeted him warmly, local business owners expressed appreciation for his volunteer work, and families who had benefited from his initiatives treated him with respect and gratitude. This external recognition reinforced the moral narrative that redemption is not only a personal journey but also a social one, affecting the way individuals are perceived and how they interact with broader society. Cinematic framing could capture Ethan walking through the town square, nodding to familiar faces, receiving smiles and small gestures of acknowledgement, highlighting the ripple effect of consistent, principled behavior. One particularly poignant moment occurred during a small community celebration organized to honor the success of recent volunteer projects, including the fundraiser and the emergency support Ethan had provided to the fire-affected family. Margaret watched from the crowd as Ethan received quiet appreciation from organizers and families alike. The camera could linger on her face, her eyes reflecting both pride and emotion, subtle tears forming as she recognized that her son had not only regained her trust but had become a person of genuine moral substance. The audience experiences the emotional climax, feeling the catharsis of years of worry and disappointment being replaced by hope, love, and admiration. Ethan also took the opportunity to reflect on his journey. Sitting quietly in a park later that day, he journaled about the lessons he had learned, the importance of accountability, the courage to face one's mistakes, and the power of small, consistent actions to rebuild trust and restore relationships. He noted how mentorship from Clara had provided guidance, but ultimately, it was his sustained effort, emotional honesty, and willingness to act selflessly that had defined his transformation. This reflection reinforces the narrative theme that redemption is active and ongoing, shaped by both internal reflection and external deeds. Margaret approached him in this reflective moment, placing a hand on his shoulder. There were no grand declarations, only a quiet acknowledgement. Her eyes conveyed relief, pride, and renewed trust. Ethan smiled, understanding that their relationship had reached a new equilibrium, grounded in transparency, mutual respect, and demonstrated reliability. Cinematically, a medium shot of their hands gently resting together could symbolize the repaired bond, the emotional weight of past betrayals balanced by the promise of future harmony. The section also emphasizes the cyclical nature of redemption. Ethan, having received guidance and support in his own journey, now began mentoring younger volunteers and supporting peers struggling with their own challenges. He shared lessons learned from mistakes, demonstrating humility and empathy rather than condescension. This act of paying it forward reflects American cultural values of community responsibility, mentorship, and moral leadership. Cinematic montages could depict Ethan guiding children or peers, their faces lighting up with understanding and encouragement, reinforcing the narrative that personal growth extends beyond the individual to the collective. By the end of this section, Ethan had not only fully restored trust with Margaret but had integrated the lessons of accountability, empathy, and moral courage into his broader life. The narrative demonstrates that redemption is not a single event but a lifelong practice, reflected in relationships, community involvement, and daily actions. The audience witnesses a profound emotional and moral resolution, a fractured relationship healed, personal integrity restored, and the broader community recognizing his transformation. The closing moments of this section could depict a quiet evening in the Parker household, with Ethan and Margaret sharing a meal, laughing softly, and reflecting on the journey that brought them here. The camera lingers on subtle gestures, a shared glance, a comforting touch, a smile of genuine connection, underscoring the emotional resonance and catharsis of a long, challenging journey brought to a heartfelt resolution. The audience is left with the moral clarity that redemption is possible, but it requires honesty, patience, humility, and consistent, selfless action. Ethan Parker had traveled a long road of transformation, his mistakes had been confronted, his relationship with his mother mended, and his standing within the community restored. Yet one final element of his journey remained unresolved, the anonymous letter that had sparked this entire path. Its author had remained a mystery, a guiding force behind his reflection and growth. Now, months later, Ethan received a final letter, hand-delivered to his doorstep by a courier whose presence seemed almost ceremonial. The envelope bore the same careful handwriting that had first prompted him to act with honesty and courage. Opening it with both anticipation and trepidation, Ethan discovered a message that would provide closure and cement the moral lessons of his journey. The letter revealed that the author had been a neighbor, someone who had quietly observed his family over the years. This person had recognized both Ethan's potential and his struggles, choosing to intervene not with judgment but with guidance. The letter praised Ethan's growth, acknowledged the courage required to face mistakes, and highlighted the impact of his actions on the broader community. Cinematically, this moment could be captured in a close-up of Ethan's hands trembling slightly as he unfolds the letter, sunlight filtering through a nearby window, emphasizing the gravity and intimacy of revelation. The letter emphasized a central theme, that redemption is possible when one chooses to act consistently with integrity, humility, and empathy. It reminded Ethan that every small decision, each act of honesty, every gesture of support, accumulated into a larger pattern of moral transformation. The author expressed pride not as an external reward but as an acknowledgement of the conscious choices Ethan had made, choices that reflected the values of accountability, courage, and compassion. This narrative moment serves as both catharsis and reflection, allowing the audience to appreciate the culmination of Ethan's long journey in a deeply personal and emotionally resonant way. Ethan read and reread the letter, letting its words settle into his consciousness. The message resonated on multiple levels, emotionally, by reaffirming his mother's pride and the respect he had earned in the community, morally, by underscoring that integrity and selflessness carry lasting significance, and culturally, by reflecting the American ethos of accountability, personal growth, and the importance of community engagement. The letter also reinforced the idea that guidance can come from unexpected sources and that paying attention to mentors, whether formal or anonymous, can be life-changing. Cinematically, the scene could shift to flashbacks of pivotal moments: Clara's mentorship, the fundraiser, helping the fire-affected family, and quiet evenings spent with Margaret, each memory now reframed with clarity and purpose. After reading the letter, Ethan felt a profound sense of closure. The mystery of the author was less important than the realization that he had fully embraced the lessons intended for him. He understood that redemption was not merely about regaining trust or public approval, it was about becoming a person aligned with his values, capable of empathy, courage, and moral decision-making even when no one was watching. The audience experiences the emotional weight of this realization, witnessing the culmination of a narrative arc rooted in reflection, action, and transformation. Ethan shared the letter with Margaret, who read it quietly, her eyes filling with tears. She held it close, recognizing the validation of both her son's growth and her own role in supporting him. This exchange symbolized the full circle of their relationship, from betrayal and distrust to patience, understanding, and finally, shared pride in the person Ethan had become. Cinematically, the camera could linger on their faces, capturing subtle smiles, moist eyes, and gentle touches that convey love, reconciliation, and emotional fulfillment. The letter also inspired Ethan to consider the broader implications of his journey. He began writing notes of encouragement to others in his community, sharing insights from his experiences, and mentoring young people struggling with ethical dilemmas or personal challenges. His story became a quiet but powerful testament to the potential for growth and change, reinforcing the narrative theme that one person's efforts can ripple outward, inspiring others and strengthening the moral fabric of a community. This act of giving back mirrors the American cultural emphasis on mentorship, civic responsibility, and the intergenerational transmission of values. In the final moments of this section, Ethan took a walk through the town that had witnessed his transformation. The streets were familiar, yet they now carried the weight of accomplishment and hope. Children waved as he passed, neighbors smiled with recognition, and families he had assisted nodded in appreciation. Every gesture reflected the tangible impact of consistent, principled action. Cinematic shots of him walking among the town's landmarks, the golden glow of late afternoon sun casting long shadows, would visually reinforce the narrative's resolution, highlighting both internal and external harmony. Ethan returned home to Margaret that evening, the letter framed on the mantel as a reminder of the journey and the lessons it carried. They shared a quiet dinner, filled with conversation, laughter, and a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. The story closed on a note of moral clarity. Redemption is earned through accountability, courage, and empathy, and its legacy is measured not only in restored relationships but in the lives touched by one's deliberate and ethical choices. The audience is left with a profound sense of catharsis, hope, and inspiration, understanding that true transformation is possible even after the deepest mistakes, and that guidance, self-reflection, and consistent moral action can change a life forever.